uh, Monday, June 15th. I want to start with the date because when it came through with this kind of insistence. Like it wasn't just a date, it was a marker, a line on a map that says you are here, and on the other side of this line, something is different. Now, I want to be honest with you about something before I go further. When I hear blow your mind and whole new world, my instinct is usually to dial it down a little. Those phrases get used a lot, and sometimes what's behind them is smaller than the language suggests. So I went in expecting to maybe soften this, tone it down to something more like a noticeable shift or an interesting development. That's not what happened. The energy around this date is loud, not loud in a chaotic way, loud in the way a single bell is loud, in a quiet room, unmistakable. You can't pretend you didn't hear it. So let's go into this properly. The first thing I want to do is separate two things that I think are getting bundled together in this title because I think they're actually different, and understanding the difference matters. There's the event, whatever specifically happens on or around this date, and then there's the world, the whole new world part. Those aren't the same thing, even though they're connected. The event is more like a doorway. The new world is what's on the other side of it. And I think it's easy to focus so much on the doorway, on what exactly is going to happen on this specific day, that you miss the bigger thing, which is what that day opens into. So let me try to address both. Starting with the doorway, what I'm feeling is information, something arriving, something being said, something becoming clear that wasn't clear before. Not vague information either. Something with edges to it. Something you can actually do something with, as opposed to just a feeling or a vibe. And the quality of this information is that it changes the shape of a decision you've been sitting with. Maybe you didn't even realize you were sitting with a decision because it's been more like a background question than an active one. But there's been something unresolved, something where you've been waiting for more information before you could really move forward in either direction. And what arrives around this date is that information, the thing that tips the scale. Has there been something like that, a decision that's been sort of hovering, where you felt like you can't really commit either way because you don't have enough to go on yet? Tell me in the comments if something comes to mind, because I think this is going to connect directly to that. Now, let me talk about the New World part, because this is where I think the bigger story is. When I say New World, I don't mean your life gets completely unrecognizable overnight. That's not what I'm picking up. What I mean is more like the rules change. Not the rules of the universe, obviously, but the rules of your specific situation. The things you've been operating under, the assumptions you've been making about what's possible, what's available to you, what the realistic options are, those assumptions are about to become outdated. And here's the thing about outdated assumptions: you don't always notice them as assumptions while you're living inside them. They just feel like reality. Like, this is how things are, this is what's available, this is the range of what I can expect. And then something happens that reveals those weren't actually the limits of reality. They were just the limits of what you'd been shown or told or had access to up until that point. That's the shift I'm feeling. Not your life-changing shape so much as your sense of what your life's shape even is changing. Like discovering a room in a house you've lived in for years that you never knew was there. The house didn't get bigger. Your understanding of the house did. Let me try to get more specific about where this shows up because I don't want to leave this entirely abstract. The first place I'm seeing it is in some kind of professional or creative context, something related to how you spend your time, how you contribute, what you're known for or working on. There's a piece of information coming around this date that reframes something. Maybe it's about an opportunity you didn't know existed. Maybe it's about a constraint you thought was permanent turning out to be more flexible than you assumed. Maybe it's someone telling you something about how they see your work or your potential that doesn't match how you've been seeing it yourself. Whatever the specific content, the effect is the same. Something that felt fixed turns out to be more negotiable than you thought. And once you know that, you can't really go back to operating as if it's fixed. You just know too much now. I keep getting this image of a ceiling, like you've been moving around in a room and you've gotten used to the height of the ceiling. You've adjusted your posture, your expectations, everything to fit underneath it. And then someone shows you that the ceiling is actually higher than you thought. Not infinite, still a ceiling, but higher. Enough higher that you have to recalibrate everything about how you move through that space. That recalibration is what Monday sets off. I also want to talk about the relational side of this because I don't think the shift is purely practical or professional. I think it touches people too. What I'm sensing is that there's someone, maybe more than one person, who's going to look different to you after this. Not because they change, because the information that arrives changes the context you're seeing them in. Here's what I mean. Sometimes we form an understanding of someone based on a limited set of information, and that understanding kind of calcifies. It becomes who they are to us, even if it was really only ever who they seemed to be, given what I knew at the time. And then new information comes along, and suddenly the understanding doesn't fit anymore. The person hasn't changed. Your picture of them has to, I feel like that's part of what's coming. Someone, and I don't have a totally clear read on who, but someone you have a fairly settled opinion about in one direction or another is going to need that opinion updated. Maybe someone you'd written off a little is going to do or say something that doesn't fit the box you'd put them in. Or maybe someone you'd put a lot of weight on, a lot of significance, is going to reveal something that shifts how much weight that's actually warranted. Either direction is possible. What's consistent is that a picture you'd settled into is going to need revising. Has there been anyone lately who surprised you, even slightly, or anyone you felt like you've got completely figured out with no real reason to think otherwise? Hold on to that thought because I think it's relevant here. I want to come back to the specific date again because I think there's something about the timing itself that's worth noting. Mondays have a particular energy, generally. They're beginnings, resets, the start of a new cycle in the rhythm most people live by. And I think that's relevant here, not just as a coincidence of the calendar, but as part of why this is landing the way it is. Whatever arrives on this day is arriving at a moment when you're already structurally in a starting kind of headspace. Even if you don't think about Mondays that way consciously, there's a kind of momentum that exists at the start of a week that doesn't exist midweek or at the end of one. So this isn't just something happens on a random day that happens to be a Monday. It's something arriving at a moment when the conditions for it to actually be acted on, rather than just noticed and then lost in the shuffle, are unusually good. You're more likely to do something with this information precisely because of when it's arriving. I think that matters because information that arrives and then just sits there unprocessed doesn't do much. Information that arrives at a moment when you're primed to act on it, that's different. That's the kind of thing that actually becomes a turning point rather than just an interesting thing that happened. Um, Let me talk a little about the emotional texture of all this, because I think blow your mind can sound intense in a way that might create some anxiety, and I don't want to leave that unaddressed. What I'm feeling isn't destabilizing in the sense of something being wrong or something falling apart. It's destabilizing in the sense of your footing shifts because the ground turned out to be different than you thought, not because the ground gave way. There's a difference between those two things. One is scary, the other is more like vertigo, maybe. That brief moment of disorientation when something you were sure about turns out to be not quite what you thought, and your brain has to do a quick recalibration. It's uncomfortable for a second, but it's not dangerous. It's just your understanding catching up to something that's actually better than what you'd been working with. I think a lot of you are going to feel something like that. A kind of wait, really moment. Maybe even a little bit of why didn't I know this before? And I think underneath that initial disorientation, what's actually there is relief. Because most of the time, when our assumptions turn out to be smaller than reality, the correction is a good one. The world turns out to have more room in it than we thought, not less. Um, I want to address something else too because I think it's relevant to how this lands for you specifically. You're someone who tends to operate within known parameters. I don't mean that as a criticism at all. I actually think it's one of your strengths. You're good at understanding the actual constraints of a situation and working skillfully within them, rather than wasting energy wishing things were different. That's a real skill. A lot of people don't have it. A lot of people spend so much energy resisting reality that they never get good at actually working with it. But that skill has a flip side. If the constraints you've been working within turn out to be narrower than the actual constraints, you've been optimizing for a smaller space than you needed to. Not because you did anything wrong, just because you were working with the information you had and the information was incomplete. What's coming on Monday, I think, is an update to that information. And because you're someone who's good at working within parameters, I think you're going to be quick to recalibrate once the parameters change. You're not going to spend a long time in disbelief or denial. I think you're going to go, okay, that changes things, and then start adjusting pretty quickly. That's actually one of your strengths showing up in a useful way here. Let me also say something about what comes after Monday, because I don't think this is a single day thing, even though the day itself is significant. What I'm picking up is that Monday is more like the moment the door opens, but walking through it, exploring what's on the other side, that's going to take longer days, maybe weeks. The new world isn't fully visible all at once. It's more like your eyes adjusting to a different kind of light. You're going to keep noticing new things in the days and weeks that follow that are connected to whatever shifts on Monday. Things that didn't seem relevant before suddenly clicking into place. Connections you hadn't made before suddenly making sense. So even if Monday itself feels like a single moment, a single piece of information, or a single development, I want you to expect the effects of it to continue unfolding for a while afterward. Don't think of it as one event that's either big enough to matter or not. Think of it as the beginning of a sequence, the first domino, not the only one. I want to close with something a little more personal because I think it matters here. A lot of the time, when people come to readings like this, there's a hope for something external, a specific thing to happen, a specific person to do something, a specific outcome to land. And sometimes that's exactly what comes through. But what I'm feeling for this one is a little different. What I'm feeling is less about a specific outcome and more about a shift in what you understand to be possible. And I think that's actually more valuable in a way, even if it's less immediately satisfying than, say, you get the job or they call you, because a single good outcome is just that one thing. But a shift in what you understand to be possible, that affects everything that comes after it. Every decision you make from that point forward gets made with a bigger picture in mind. That's not just one good thing, that's a different operating system. So when I say whole new world, I think that's actually pretty accurate, even though it sounds dramatic. Not because your circumstances are going to look completely different by next week, but because the frame you're seeing your circumstances through is about to get bigger, and once a frame gets bigger, it doesn't really go back to being small again. You just keep seeing more from then on than you did before. Monday is close. Whatever's coming, I don't think it's going to feel small when it arrives, even if at first glance it might look ordinary. Pay attention to what shows up, especially anything that makes you go, wait, that changes things. That's it. That's the moment. And what comes after it is going to be worth paying attention to as well.